Welcome to Inside China Politics. I'm Deng Yuwen. This channel breaks down China's politics and leadership dynamics in a clear and accessible way. From elite power struggles to US, China relations, Taiwan issues, and the deeper logic behind Beijing's decisions. If you want to truly understand what is happening inside China's political system, you're in the right place. Today, I'm going to walk you through the White House's newly released National Security Strategy, a document far more direct, blunt, and confrontational than most observers expected. Originally scheduled for release in late summer, the report was delayed, reportedly because Treasury Secretary Forstallings wanted to soften its language toward China to clear space for U.S.-China trade talks. That created speculation. Would Washington tone down its China policy? After reading the full document, the answer is clear. Absolutely not. The rhetoric is not loud, but the structure and the logic could not be more explicit. This report marks a strategic shift. The United States is no longer satisfied with simply competing with China. It is preparing to exclude China from the regions and domains it deems vital. I would summarize the U.S. approach in 8 words. Secure the rear. Advance the front. From competition to exclusion. First, redrawing the map. A China-free Western Hemisphere. One of the most striking features of this report is something no previous national security strategy ever said so directly. Chinese influence in the Western Hemisphere is a national security threat. This signals a new Monroe Doctrine, one shaped by Trump, but now codified in official strategy. What does this mean? It means the U.S. is redrawing its sphere of influence. The Western Hemisphere must remain exclusively American. Chinese investment in ports, energy, telecom, or critical minerals will be treated as strategic infiltration. Belt and road projects in Latin America will be viewed as encroachment that must be pushed back. In essence, Washington no longer accepts China as a global peer able to compete around the world. It wants to restore something close to a pre-Cold War zone of exclusion. A geopolitical, you shall not enter. This is why I emphasize the distinction between anti-China and excluding China. Anti-China is ideological. Excluding China is hard-edged strategic engineering. The United States seeking to erase Chinese presence in vital regions. This sets the tone for everything else in the document. Second, the Indo-Pacific, turning the first island chain into a new Berlin Wall. If the Western Hemisphere is the rear battlefield, the Indo-Pacific is the front line. The report repeats 3 decisive points. Reaffirm the importance of the first island chain. Embed Taiwan directly into the U.S. deterrence architecture. Reassert American primacy in the South China Sea. Taken together, they spell out a single, unmistakable message. The United States intends to turn the first island chain into a modern Berlin Wall. The logic is simple. China must not break through the island chain. Taiwan is the centerpiece of that chain. The South China Sea must remain under U.S. control. This is no longer the language of classic diplomacy. It reads like wartime planning. Even more telling is what the report says and doesn't say about Taiwan. First, just like during Trump's presidency, the U.S. again does not include the phrase, "We do not support Taiwan independence." Second, and more important, the strategy states that the U.S. will build a military able to prevent aggression at any point along the first island chain and deny any attempt to seize Taiwan. That is practically treaty-level language. It doesn't explicitly guarantee defense of Taiwan, but the signal could not be clearer. If China uses force, the U.S. intends to intervene militarily. Whether Washington can or will is another matter, but it is now openly saying so. Third, the real battlefield is not military. It's technology and economics. The report devotes enormous space to tech and industry, reflecting a judgment widely shared in Washington. If China achieves autonomy in AI, quantum technology, advanced manufacturing, and semiconductors, the US will no longer be able to prevent China from becoming the world's largest economy. As a result, the following domains are elevated to national security: semiconductor supply chains, lithography machines, AI and critical algorithms, critical minerals, clean energy technologies, space and biotech, data governance and digital standards. U.S. Reindustrialization. The objective is not to defeat China in the Cold War sense. The objective is to construct a world system whose core technologies China cannot enter. Hence, the strategy calls for tighter export controls, coordinated technology denial with allies, cutting China out of key supply chains, dominating global technical standards. This is no longer competition. This is structural exclusion, a long-term attempt to block China's ascent to the next technological revolution. Fourth, Beijing's response: a shrinking window, an accelerated deployment. After reading this document, Beijing will not sit still. The report tells China very plainly: the next 10 to 15 years will be a prolonged period of confrontation. The strategic window China believed it still possessed suddenly looks much narrower. The likely Chinese response will be to accelerate technological self-reliance, supply chain localization, influence expansion in the global south, military modernization, anti-intervention capabilities around Taiwan, strategic coordination with Russia, Iran, and others. The more explicit the U.S. becomes, the more China will plan for the worst-case scenario. This is the strategic spiral the report triggers. Fifth, Taiwan's response. U.S. clarity equals Taiwan's boldness. The place where this clarity will have the most immediate impact is Taiwan. The report sends two psychological messages to Taipei. Taiwan is central to U.S. strategy. The U.S. will act to stop China from changing the status quo by force. This will shift the mindset of the ruling DPP. For President Lai Ching-te, the message is loud and clear. Washington is closer to Taiwan than ever. Add to this Japan's likely support, explicitly voiced by Kono Sanai, and the result is a powerful emotional reinforcement. In this context, Taipei may push stronger nationhood narratives, challenge the One China framework more openly, deepen military cooperation with the U.S., amplify China threat rhetoric internationally, explore gray zone legal pathways toward de facto independence. One possible path, which I discussed recently, is a constitutional court interpretation recognizing Taiwan as a sovereign state whose territory excludes mainland China. This would be legally framed as a judicial act, not a political one. For Beijing, this would be unacceptable. It would force China to respond, likely with force, because not responding would undermine both the CCP and Xi Jinping himself. Therefore, Taiwan's boldness, fueled by U.S. clarity, actually increases the danger of miscalculation. Sixth, the risk of conflict, from low probability to accelerating tension. After this report, three forces now simultaneously push the Taiwan Strait toward instability. Taiwan becomes more confident. Beijing becomes less tolerant. China sees the U.S. preparing for long-term confrontation, accelerates military readiness. The U.S. expands deployments along the first island chain, friction multiplies. These three vectors all move in the same direction, and the result is clear. The probability of a Taiwan Strait conflict rises from roughly 5 to 10% to 15-20%. This does not mean war is imminent, but it means the structural risk is now higher and accelerating. Conclusion: the U.S. has entered the exclusion China era. This new national security strategy marks a new phase in U.S. grand strategy. Trump began the shift toward strategic competition. Biden deepened tech containment and alliance mobilization. Now, Washington openly aims to exclude China from key regions and critical technologies to prevent China from becoming a global power on equal footing. From here on, three trends will define the landscape. Irreversible structural confrontation between the U.S. and China, greater Taiwanese assertiveness, and higher risk of misjudgment. An earlier, not later, window for Taiwan's Strait instability. We are entering a new geopolitical era, one shaped not by cooperation with China, but by the attempt to shut China out. This has been Inside China Politics. If you found this analysis helpful, please subscribe, like, and share the channel. Your support helps more people understand what's really happening inside China's political system. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.